Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, in the last two lectures, we tried to understand the concept of social change, meaning, process, and various agents of social change. But we didn't try to examine the theoretical aspect of social change. So today we are going to understand the theory of social change, theories of social change from the debate part of the social change. So we will try to understand, critically examine the social change in today's lecture. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in the studio senior academician Dr. S.S. Joska, Surinder Singh Joska. He is a professor of sociology, Center for Social Studies System in Jawaharlal Nehru University, a premier university of the country. And he himself is a social science thinker, sociologist. So I think his knowledge and understanding of the subject will help us to understand this topic and will give insight how to study the theory of social change. So on your behalf, I welcome him for EduSet lecture on this very topic. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. When we talk about social change, we should also understand what are we talking about. I realize that you have already done some of that, but let me go back to what do I mean by the idea of social change. Social change is obviously when there is change in or of society. Therefore, we also have an understanding of society. What do we call as social change? There is change every day is a new day. Every time something new is happening. Does that mean there is a change all the time? The answer is both yes and no. In everyday life, society repeats itself. For example, human beings are born in a social context, in families, and along with other people, to their parents. They grow up, they become adults, they are called as adults, they go to school before that, and then they get educated, they are socialized into the culture of that community or that society. And then there's a kind of, different societies have different notions of life cycles, that you grow up, you have to find a job, you have to study before that, then we get married, then we have children, then we are busy bringing them up, and then obviously one is employed and one retires, and then there is old age, and then the next generation does the same thing. So there are new people every day. When a child is born, you feel there is something new. But as such, society has a tendency to repeat itself. So when we talk about society, we talk about system, we talk about the reality which in a sense has a pattern. You know what the other person is going to do. When people grow up, they want to have children, they do get married, they form their own families. These are called social institutions. We have our ideas, we think in a particular way, we like certain things, we dislike certain things, but depending upon our values. And then we have certain kind of practices. When we are driving on the road, we behave in a particular manner. When we go home, we behave differently. When we are talking to our friends, we behave in a different way. So there are practices. So society is made up of institutions, values, and practices. But this pattern does not remain the same all the time. The way we talk to each other undergoes change, and that is what social change is. Institutions undergo change. We realize or we think that institution of family, for example, has always been there and will always be there. This is not true. This kind of monogamous nuclear family, if you were to think of typical urban family where you have husband, wife, and children staying together, this is not something that has always been there. This is something which has come into existence only recently. Or think of education. We did not have the kind of schools and universities and colleges that we have today just 200 years back, right? So these institutions did not exist. Not that education was not there. People were educated, but the system of education was very different. And the fact that we are talking to each other through a medium like television also shows that at the very moment when we are talking, the nature of institution of education is undergoing a change. So I am sitting on this side as a teacher, and you are watching me, and you are trying to learn. So we don't really have a classroom situation where teachers are teaching the students and students are asking questions. So I can communicate with students at the same moment from different parts of the world. So this is a major change happening in society with far-reaching implications. So the various factors that bring about these changes, we are talking about technology, our imagination, our way of thinking, pressures, for example, if there is an environmental pressure, suddenly there are disasters, or if there is otherwise change in weather patterns, social life would change, right? People move from agriculture to industry, from rural areas to urban areas. Urban life is different from rural life, so that's also social change. So social change is that when the patterns of doing things in an everyday life undergo a kind of change. Change is also seen in terms of small changes and big changes, right? For example, there are changes in society and the changes of society, right? The change in society is when overall structure remains the same, but we were to begin to act differently in certain ways. For example, we continue to live in urban areas, but we change the housing pattern, right? So the houses are, instead of having single floor houses, if you construct multi-story towers, 10 floor, 20 floor, 30 floor, there are countries where you have even houses for up to 100 floors. So when people live together in one tower, their social life is different, right? But this is a change in society. We are talking about urban society, urban living, but in one place, lots of people are living. They may not be interacting with each other, but there is a change in society. Or similarly, one can think of family life, right? The moment a child is born, or the second child is born, a third child is born, a fourth child is born, there would be a change in the institution of family, but the family stays. With a family without children or a family with one or two child is very different from a family with 7 or 8 children, or family which lives with another kind of family or extended kinship, grandparents or even cousins and uncles. So that is still when we are talking about change in society. What do we mean by change of society? For example, most countries in the world until say 100 years back depended primarily, or 200 years back, depended primarily on agriculture. They lived in rural settlements, smaller settlements. But today in Western world and increasingly in other parts of the world also, agriculture is becoming very, very insignificant or marginal to the real life of society. Most of the value is produced elsewhere. For example, in Western European countries or North American countries, only 2-3%, sometimes even less than that, population depends on agriculture directly or lives in so-called rural areas. Most of the people live in urban areas. Even rural areas, for example, in countries like America, are called small towns. So there are no rural areas left any longer. So when you don't have rural society, that is called change of society. Everything in society has changed, from settlement pattern to occupational society to family life to the way people think of their leisure, the way they relate to each other, the language in which they speak to each other. When you come to city, you are living with variety of people. In village, everyone knows everyone else. So you know this person is from this caste, this community, this age, this family, this kind of nature, this orientation. But when you come to city, you know some people, but most of the people that one interacts with, they are strangers. And they are strangers of strange kind. They are not people of your kind. There is diversity of variety of people. The people coming from different parts of the world, different parts of the country, speaking different kind of languages. Their food habits are different. Their style of life is different. So one acts in a very different way. So that would be change of society, from rural and agrarian societies to modern industrial urban societies. These are large scales, big changes. And these big changes happen over a long period of time. They don't happen in a day or two or in a couple of times. All societies change, all societies have been changing, and when the discipline of sociology begins to talk about society, it also tries to understand what brings about change, or what do we mean by change. The point that I was making, what is change? Change is not simply matter of changing the decoration of your house. The change is when institutional patterns, things around which we organize our social life, when they undergo change. That is social change. The values, when we change our values, for example, instead of respecting elders, we begin to devalue age. That would be change of society, change in society. So our values have undergone change, practices undergo change. I was just talking to you about life in urban areas. The practices are very different than the life in rural areas. What causes this change? What brings about this change? And that is a theoretical question. Why do societies change? Why should societies change? When we have stability, when we are living together more or less peacefully, why do we need new things, right? Why should we disturb our life when there is stability in society, when there is some sense of predictability? So there is a lot of comfort in that, when I know that this is how I am going to lead my life, and this is where my children are going to grow up, and this is what they are going to do when they grow up, and this is how I would grow up and become an old person and eventually die, and then there would be other people who would take my position. This is a very, in a sense, comfortable life. Why should societies change? And that is a theoretical question. That is what theories of social change try to tell us. Broadly speaking, in sociology, there are two notions or two theories of change, two sets of theories of change. First, theories of change are evolutionary theories of change. They are also sometimes called as functionalist or structural functionalist theories of change. The scholars who use structural functional theoretical framework, they talk about change, and that's how they explain change. The second set of theories are radical theories of change, revolutionary theories of change, which talk about change as a sudden kind of phenomenon, revolutions. And the person who coined this theory was Karl Marx. So there are materialist explanations of change, or theoretical, Marxist conflict theory of change. There are other people also who have commented on change and who have disagreed with. Within these theories also there is a variety or range of theories of change. But most important category in the functionalist theory of change or structural functionalist theory of change is the idea of evolution and adaptation. What do we mean by evolution? Evolution is a category which is used by biologists. You would have heard the name of Darwin, who talks about the process of evolution, how human beings evolve from simple organism called amoeba to via, some people would say we were monkeys at one time or like monkeys, and now we have a different kind of bodily structure, and therefore we have different way of thinking and different way of imagining about ourselves. So what does evolutionaries of theories of change say? They say that there is a process of evolution from simple to complex, that there are simple organisms, similarly there are simple societies, and simple societies with the process of evolution tend to experience what is called as, Herbert Spencer described it as, process of structural differentiation. What is structural differentiation? Structural differentiation is when the same task which is being done by one system, that is being done by a variety of systems, or when one particular task gets differentiated into several types of tasks. That is called process of structural differentiation. Take the example of human socialization. As we grow up, we learn a lot of things. We learn language first of all, we learn to communicate with our parents, with our mother. She is the person who gives you birth, and after you are born, she is the one who feeds you. So you need to, for your own survival, you need to communicate with your mother, and that is the process of learning. And this learning for human beings, unlike some other species, goes on for decades, at least one decade, at least 10, 12 years. human child needs some kind of protection, and we are learning our basic skills of survival. In simple societies, in pre-modern societies, say 500 years back or 2000 years back or 5000 years back, all learning was done within the primary kinship group, even though there was no institution of family, but it would be the small group in which one is born. One would learn to communicate, speak, and then also learn other skills. For example, if you have to survive, you need to also do some hunting or plucking of flowers and food, and that's how you grow up. So from learning to communicate to learning all kinds of survival skills, only institution you had was the institution of kinship. And the kinship was also an institution which was primarily a political institution, right? Who decided what should be done by you? Who decided how you should lead your life? It was head of the tribe or kinship institution. It could be head of the family or extended kinship institution, tribal chief or whatever. So one institution of kinship, in a sense, had everything. Human beings grew up there, they worked together, their occupation was same, their learning was same. Today, if you will compare, we have institution of family, we have relatives, we have kinship, but by the time child is 3.5 years old, and sometimes even before that, child begins to go to school. We learn a lot from our parents within the family, but large amount of things that we learn is from school. Right? If you become an engineer or a professor or something else, you also go to college and university to learn your skills. Right? All these skills are imparted by different kinds of people. So the learning process has been differentiated into, on the one hand you have family, on the other hand you have school, then you have colleges, then you also have mass media, then you learn a lot by reading on your own, literature, newspapers, and obviously your friendship circles. There are specific kind of training centers where you go and learn certain skills. So the process of learning is not happening in one place. The idea of learning has also become different in the sense that it also become differentiated. Everyone doesn't learn the same thing. The tribal community that we were talking about a little while ago, everyone became more or less the same person. If you are cultivating land, almost everyone in the family, in the community cultivated land, and everybody learned the same kind of skills. Now you have variety of skills, thousands of types of skills. If you were to make list of the kind of occupations that people have in a city like Delhi or Bombay or Hyderabad or Calcutta, it's innumerable, right? Large number of occupations, variety of, so there is a kind of division of labor in society as Durkheim would call, and that leads to process of structural differentiation. And why does that happen? Because population changes. Human mind is a creative mind, and human mind is very different from mind of other species. Once you learn to make tools, you go on developing skills, developing technology. So once you have larger population, once you have a challenge, for example, if the weather is hot or very cold, how would human being respond? How do you survive? In order to survive, you would invent new kinds of technologies. And those technologies initially were invented, for example, just to heat a cold room or cool a hot room, but eventually they multiply into other kinds of things. So the structural functionalists would think about society as a process of adaptation, and through the process of adaptation, societies undergo change. So there is change in one system, suddenly you have new technology available, rest of the systems will adapt to the kind of possibilities that exist now. If the population increases over a period of time, you need to specialize, you need to have kind of division of labor, increase productivity, and that challenge would be responded to by human beings by bringing about change in society. So with technology, with different kinds of processes of change, societies undergo change. And this is an evolutionary process of change, that societies change over a period of time through the process of structural differentiation, and there is a process of evolution from simple to complex. So this theory of change would suggest that there is only one direction in which society changes. Societies don't come back. We've not really had any instance where, for example, an agrarian society, after having become an industrial society, has again become agrarian society. We do have something like organic farming coming back, but organic farming is also a modern kind of farming. So with modern technology, societies keep moving on. So there is a process of evolution which is progressive in nature, that you do newer things and new types of things, variety of things which have different kind of quality. So functionalist theories of change will not identify any agency. The change happens because it is because of structural pressures. It is because of conflicts in society, gradually things would change. For example, Durkheim would say, if there is crime in society, the high crime would lead to change in the way society is organized. Either you'll have more police force, different kind of judicial system, different kind of political system, because all these systems of society are interlinked. One system gets disturbed, the other system responds, and in the process you have a kind of process of change which kind of makes society better than what it was before. So there is a progressive evolutionary change, generally goes in one direction, a linear process of modernization, of development. All these categories have come from there. Urbanization, industrialization, these are all categories that would tell us about evolutionary process of change which structural functionalists would want to kind of conceptualize. The second set of theories, as I told you, the two kinds of theories. The second set of theories are theories which emanate from the writings of Karl Marx. And many of you would already know Karl Marx also provided a very elaborate theory of human society. But his theory of human society was based on the assumption that society is society because there is inequality, there is conflict, there is tension in society all the time, and that conflict is because of class struggle. Class struggle doesn't mean that trade unions have to fight with factory owners. Class struggle means that society is based on a system which is unfair, in the sense that some people who have power, they control others, and this controlling brings about peace, a normal kind of state, but that normal state doesn't last for very long because it is based on an idea which is unequal, which is unjust. So when you have production of surplus in society, with development of technology, with people being able to produce more than what they require for their consumption, there is also an emergence of class, in the sense that some people take away the surplus and make others their slaves, because some people can produce for more than what they require. So you have kind of class division in society. So all societies, existing societies or hitherto existing societies, have been unequal societies. And inequality is not simply a matter of individual merit or individual capability. Right? It's not because some people are better off than others and therefore they are paid better, they live better. This is a structural thing for Marx. Right? There is a structure of society, the way society is organized. For example, in India, we have had caste system for a long time. Caste system is not something which you choose to be part of. Caste system is not something which is based on merit. Caste system is not something which is based on the capability of human individuals. Caste system is not based on the quality of blood that different communities have, even though there would be an internal explanation of caste, but as we know, as social scientists, we know caste is a social structure. Social structure means that this is organized in a particular way, and that organization also implies that certain people or certain communities in the system are privileged and certain are underprivileged or disprivileged. And those who are at the lower end of caste hierarchy, they obviously are unhappy with the system, and it's natural for them to be unhappy with the system. Same is the case with other kind of societies. It's not only India that you have inequality or caste system. All societies of the world have so far been unequal. Unequal doesn't mean just inequality among individuals. Unequal also means there are structural inequalities like caste system. So there are certain groups of people, certain types of people which are considered inferior than others, or they are not allowed to enjoy benefits of their life as others are. So what happens? Marx says that the social structure of any society or any epoch, any time is based on some kind of an economic structure. So it depends on the kind of technology that is available, what he calls as the means of production, and the way those means of production have been socially organized. The social organization of means of production is what determines the structure of a society. Now, he says that society changes through sudden revolutions, that you have one kind of society because there is certain kind of economic system that exists in society, certain kind of mode of production that exists in society. For example, in agriculture you have some kind of agrarian mode of production, a feudal kind of society. In pre-agrarian societies you could have slaves and slave owners, but that would vary from one region to the other. So there would be societies, for example, where the slavery has become an institution. Slavery is institutionalized. There are certain people who are treated as slaves and there are certain people who are slave owners. The slave owners obviously exercise or enjoy all the power, and the slaves are subordinate people. And in history, a time comes when slaves revolt against the slave owners. Why do they revolt? Marx has a very technical explanation for this, materialist explanation for this. He says when the forces of production, technology keeps growing, the existing framework of relations of production becomes incompatible for the functioning of that kind of technology. And then there is a process which erupts into kind of conflict, and eventually there is a revolution. This is just a model. Actual operation of it obviously varies significantly, and it varies from time to time. Slave revolts were sudden eruptions, and then in feudal society, Marx talks about bourgeois revolution, where the middle class, the new middle class which emerges in the 19th century within feudalism, begins to protest against the existing structure of social relations, which was controlled by church in Europe or by the king, and they find this as a problem in their own development. And then they revolt against that system. You could have revolt manifesting itself into different kinds of wars or protests or sabotage or all kinds of things, but eventually you have development of capitalism. And capitalist society is what we live in today. All societies of the world today are capitalist societies in one way or the other. So for the first time in history, you have a global system, global economic system. Politically, we still have nation states, but economic system is more or less common everywhere, and it's quite interdependent. And in capitalism also there is inequality. Capitalism is based on the idea of merit and individual rights, but actual structure of capitalism is determined by the mode of production that we have in capitalist society. And the people who own the means of production, they are the ones who continue to be very powerful. They are the ones who control society. They are the people who control our ideas. They are the people who control our values. They are the people who control political institutions. But this power cannot go on forever. Those who are on the margins, those who are subordinate, those who are in classical language, working classes, they also recognize, they begin to recognize that we are being exploited, and there is a process through which we are being subordinated to the existing system And this subordination cannot go on because the reality is unequal and it produces conflict, contradictions, and eventually those at the receiving end of the system will organize themselves and bring about revolution. One such revolution happened in Soviet Russia in the early 20th century. That revolution didn't last for very long, but it was a kind of class revolution which tried to establish a socialist society. Same was the case with China, peasant revolution. So Marx would say that revolution brings about significant change. The whole social structure undergoes change. Political structure undergoes change. The way human beings relate to each other undergoes change. So there are these two broad theories of change, one which would look at change as a conflict situation, and the other one look at change as an evolutionary adaptive process.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir.
Yeah.
We have a call from Uttar Pradesh. Good afternoon, friend. Please ask your question.
हाँ सर, हिंदी में पूछ सकता हूँ?
जी जी, हिंदी में पूछिए.
सर मेरा सवाल ये है, जैसे भारत का इस टाइम जो जनसंख्या है वो लगभग 30% शहरों में रहता है, तो मतलब ये है कि जो आने वाले वक्त में जो है शहरीकरण बढ़ेगा तो हमारी जनसंख्या कहाँ जाके स्थिर हो सकती है, मतलब 60%, 50% या 70%? क्या कोई हाइपोथेटिकल क्वेश्चन है सर, ये कोई अंदाजा है इस बात का?
जनसंख्या से कि स्टेबलाइजेशन ऑफ पॉपुलेशन.
हाँ नहीं, वो क्वेश्चन जो है वो अलग किस्म का क्वेश्चन है. वो जो डेमोग्राफिक प्रोसेसेस हैं, डेमोग्राफर्स हैं, वो इसका जवाब दे सकते हैं, लेकिन परिवर्तन हो रहा है. अभी हम जो शहरीकरण की बात करते हैं, अर्बनाइजेशन की बात करते हैं, या जो हमें नंबर दिए जाते हैं अर्बन पॉपुलेशन के, दैट्स ए प्योरली डेमोग्राफिक फिगर. वो सिर्फ ये कहता है कि आपको कितने लोग शहरों में रह रहे हैं. बट सत्य यह है कि गाँव के लोग भी अब काफ़ी सारा शहरीकरण वहाँ भी हो रहा है. जो लोग खेती में काम करते थे उनका नंबर बहुत कम हो रहा है. Even though people continue to stay in the village, their life undergoes significant change. They become urbanized, they become employed in non-agricultural sector, even while living in the village. So one will have to reconceptualize this whole idea about rural and urban when it comes to India. So it's possible that in India we would still have 50% population living in rural areas, but those who are dependent on agriculture, their number may come down to 10% or 15% or maybe even lesser.
दूसरे दर्शक हैं मध्य प्रदेश से, उनका सवाल लेते हैं. जी नमस्कार, सवाल पूछिए. ओके, इट गॉट डिस्कनेक्टेड, सो प्लीज कंटिन्यू सर.
Basically, यही है जो the point that we were making, that these are broadly speaking two theories of change, and these are theories. The actual reality of change is obviously much more complex, because the way world is evolving, the way world is developing, is not based on models of different theories. The world evolves on its own. World has its own dynamics, and every society has its own internal process, variety, and specific history. For example, if we were to think of India today, the process of change in India is going to be very different from what it was in Western Europe. It's not like there's a process of evolution which has already matured in Western societies and it has not matured in India, it came late to India. That is a very Western way of thinking about third world countries, or Eurocentric way of thinking about third world countries. The fact is that, yes, the modern technology comes to India through colonial rule, and this colonization has its own implications on India. Right? But India is not, or in 17th century, 18th century, India was not in any way less developed than Europe. Industrial revolution brings about a particular kind of revolution. Western countries experience that kind of growth, but actual reality at the social level was not very different. Now the world has been, in a sense, colonized in a particular way, so that in a sense has its own implications the way we think about ourselves.
Okay. So how will you explain what are the different, what are the elements that the students should differentiate between model of change and the theory of change? And how one can differentiate this is the model of change and that is the theory of change?
There's no difference between model of change and theory of change. The word model is not used in social sciences. What we talk about are theories of change, and theories of change only give some kind of idea about how to make sense of what is changing, what is happening to society, or what is likely to happen. demographics, for example, when we talk about population, many people had predicted that in third world countries, population would keep increasing and suddenly there would be serious demographic crisis. Now, the way reality has unfolded itself, that has not happened. In some sense, population has increased, but in most parts of India, for example, population growth has stabilized. It's only in regions where we have not had economic development that population is still increasing rapidly. And now, in the global demographic discourse, what we have is the notion of demographic dividend, that there are certain countries which are facing stagnation in population growth, while India and some other countries still have large number of young people. So it actually becomes an asset if Indian kind of leadership has imagination. We can gain a lot simply because we have large number of people. So theories are only suggestive in society, because, and that is the main criticism, that's where I was to come towards the end. The criticism of the so-called theories of social change is that they don't realize that when we are talking about human societies, we are talking about active agents. They are not determined. They are not determined by structures. They don't evolve mechanically. They don't respond to forces of production. They also have brain. They also have their own head. They also have their own mind. And they have intentions. So they can get together, and there are interests that can stall change. There are interests that can take societies in different directions. And that is what the reality is. So there is no unilinear process of evolution. There is process of change, no doubt about it. And most societies in the world are moving forward, but not all societies are moving forward. Some societies can also get stuck, right? Because of certain historical, political reasons, they are not allowed to grow, they are not allowed to develop. India, for example, even though it became independent for a long time, its growth rate was very slow. India's growth rate or development was actually negative during the colonial period. In many ways, India suffered because of, so it's not automatic that things would change on their own. So the different agents, colonialism is an agency. Colonialism is a force that can obstruct the process of change. Similarly, different kinds of social movements could bring about different kinds of changes. Depends who is able to mobilize themselves, who is able to organize themselves, right? If you look at the Indian society, the way, for example, question of caste has become a political issue, but in some ways, caste continues to be very significant, very important in society. Certain groups which mobilize themselves, they have been able to get benefit of the process of development. Those groups that did not mobilize themselves, or they are not able to have their own leadership for some historical reasons, accidents, they are still very, backward, or they're left behind. Same is the case with tribal communities or ST communities. Their situation is different because they don't have very articulated leadership of their own, given their own diversities. So the process of change happens with agency, with people who mobilize themselves, who have a notion of direction where they want to go. And if they are able to pursue their agenda, then society begins to change in one direction or the other. So we also have democratic system where people can mobilize, people can articulate their voice, people can push a particular kind of agenda. But we know, as Marx had rightly said, that the capitalist class in capitalism is most powerful, which appears to be also the case. So that is also a truth.
Okay. So, we have another call from Jammu and Kashmir. Good afternoon, friend. Please ask your question.
यस सर सर मैं हिंदी में एक क्वेश्चन पूछना चाहूँगा
जी जी पूछिए
सर मेरा क्वेश्चन सर ये है जो कास्ट सिस्टम या कास्ट स्ट्रक्चर की सर बात कर रहे हैं सर हेलो
हाँ हाँ पूछिए
हाँ जी तो सर इसमें सर जो सिस्टम या कास्ट स्ट्रक्चर की सर इसमें जो डिफरेंसेस हैं सर जो माइंड सेट बना है सोसाइटी का इसमें सर कैसे मतलब ये खत्म किया जा सकता है कि आने वाले फ्यूचर में कास्ट सिस्टम जो है बिल्कुल अबॉलिश हो जाए इक्वलिटी है जाए सोसाइटी में सर
कास्ट सिस्टम एबॉलिश हो जाए और सोसाइटी में इक्वलिटी आ जाए, क्या ऐसा संभव है?
हाँ, संभव बिल्कुल है, वो होगा भी सही किसी न किसी तरीके से, और किसी तरीके से ऑलरेडी हो भी गया है. In some sense, the old kind of caste system has significantly disintegrated. If you look at the classical literature on caste system, the kind of caste system that existed in most parts of the country, say in the 19th century, 18th century, the Jajmani system, if you go to rural areas of Punjab or Haryana or Himachal or Western UP where you have had green revolution, the old kind of Jajmani system is completely disintegrated. So caste as a system has also become redundant, right? Now when you want to buy a pot for keeping water in your house, we go to the market and you buy water bottles, or we buy campers, or we buy, even when we buy an earthen pot, we buy it from the market. So in urban area, caste has become redundant. People have caste identities, and there is a different kind of hierarchy of networks because of the inequalities of capitalism. So caste comes back to us in a variety of different ways, but the old kind of caste system is already disintegrated in many different ways, right? Similarly, with the emergence of say middle class society, urban society, which is based on education, where education is open to everyone. We have secular education. We have constitutional guarantees. We do talk about continuities in the caste system, but we forget the amount of change that has already happened. There are problems with our society, but if you look at the system of caste relations, it has already changed in many, many different ways. But societies are not like slates. You can't erase an existing reality and then rewrite it with something else. Societies would have their own systems. Even if you go to Europe or North America, if you go to United States, you would say divisions based on race still being very, very significant. Even otherwise, communities who came from Ireland, they call themselves Irish Americans. Those who went from Britain, they have different kind of self-image. So all societies have an element of continuity, because that's how human beings are. They like their culture. Even, for example, in Indian society, those who come from so-called Dalit background, they are also proud of being what they are. They also have their own culture. They also have their own gods and goddesses. And they want to preserve those cultures. They want to preserve those identities. So people want to have those identities. But since we live in unequal society, what happens is, in unequal societies, the old kind of inequality tend to become new kind of inequalities. So that is a much bigger sociological question on which a lot of research is being done, and maybe on some other day we can talk about inequalities, old and new.
So physical bondage now nowhere exists. We can
Most places that has become a thing of past, but in some areas it would still be. I mean, India is such a diverse country.
Yeah, in remote
you never know. Yeah, in some pockets you may still find old structures, but the trend is towards disintegration of old system of caste hierarchy and the ideology that supported caste system. Nobody accepts karma ideology, particularly those who are at the receiving end of system.
Okay, what we have learned, we noticed that caste system has been criticized, but what is the wisdom that needs to learn from the caste system? What is the positive point one need to learn from the caste system? Because this has been prevalent for so many years, 2000 years.
No, that is not the way to think about. It's not some simply question of positive and negative. As far as contemporary India is questioned, the caste system is a redundant system. It's constitutionally illegal. It's not simply a question of what do we learn from caste. I think that's a wrong question to ask, because then one tends to justify caste system.
Okay.
Caste system by definition was a very strange kind of system of subordination where certain human beings were not even treated as human beings. So question of untouchability, for example, is something which, but that was there, and now it is illegal. You can't practice untouchability. It's against the law. So I think this is something which is completely historically redundant. And
this leading to the class, say this money, economic wise, how this could be abolished? What could be the answer to this?
That is something that human beings will find out. That's why I'm saying that we cannot have theories of change. We cannot predict human societies, because human societies have capacity, have agency. The way in which we are going, for example, if we treat Constitution as our sacred document that brings us together, then Constitution has a particular kind of vision about caste system. And it talks primarily about civil society, individuals and individual merit and achievement and rights.
We have call from Rajasthan. Good afternoon, friend. Please ask your question.
सर मैं ये पूछना चाह रहा था,
जी।
मैं पूछना ये चाह रहा था कि सर कोई भी चेंज अगर सोसाइटी में आता है तो वो सोसाइटी का जो चेंज होता है वो जरूरी है या कास्ट और रिलीजन बेसिस जो होता है उसका वो सर अच्छा होता है या बुरा होता है? जरूरी है कि हर बार कास्ट या रिलीजन किसी भी सोसाइटी के लिए एक नेगेटिव चेंज रहे? मे दिस नॉट बी अ पॉजिटिव चेंज इन अनदर और in some respect in case I want to ask that.
Is it necessary that changes be positive and maybe negative?
Yes, change can be both negative as well as positive. We can also go backward. I mean, that is, see, those who were, I was saying, evolutionary theories of change would tend to suggest that change is always progressive and goes in one direction. But that is not the reality. Societies get stuck, they go backward. For example, if you think of countries like Iraq or countries in the Middle East, Iran, these were centers of
Churning keeps
culture,
going on. Yeah.
learning. Yeah, they were places where societies, civilizations were very advanced.
Okay.
Same is the case with this part of the world where we are sitting today, India, China. So if you look at the 16th and 17th century, these were the societies that were far, far ahead of Europe. But because of colonization, there was also a kind of, setback. So they went backward, and agriculture, for example, its productivity declined. So that does happen.
So, well friends, with this word we conclude the lecture. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on behalf I thank Dr. S.S. Jotka for giving such a wonderful lecture. Thank you very much.